Mice. The night my mother introduced me to the table I'd be sitting at, she didn't actually introduce me at all. She just pointed. Third row, near the back, beside the window that faced the parking lot. My cousin Derek's rehearsal dinner was being held at the Harrington Club, a private members venue on the north side of the city, with dark wood paneling and a wine list that started at $80 a bottle. My aunt had reserved the space 4 months in advance. There were centerpieces with white peonies and gold-rimmed place cards at every table except mine. Mine had a small folded tent card with my name typed in a default font and a single tea candle that had already burned down to almost nothing by the time we arrived. I noticed it the way you notice something you already knew was coming. My name is Claire. I'm 29 years old. I'm a licensed social worker at a community mental health clinic in East Garfield Park, one of the lower-income neighborhoods on the west side of Chicago. I carry a caseload of 31 clients. I do crisis intervention, I coordinate housing placements, I sit with people on the worst days of their lives and try to help them find one reason to keep going. I make $54,000 a year before taxes. I drive a 2014 Honda Civic with a cracked passenger mirror that I keep meaning to fix. I eat lunch at my desk most days because there isn't time for anything else. My family calls what I do the helping thing. Sometimes they call it the social work thing. My Uncle Gerald, who owns a regional logistics company and has a handicap parking placard he definitely doesn't need, once told me at Thanksgiving that I had the heart for charity but not the head for business, and everyone at the table laughed like he'd said something generous. I smiled and passed the cranberry sauce and filed it away with all the others. The Callaway family made its name in commercial real estate. My grandfather started with a strip mall in Naperville in 1974 and turned it into Callaway Development Group, which at its peak managed 43 properties across 4 states. My Uncle Gerald took over when my grandfather retired. My cousin Derek, his son, had just been made junior partner at 27. There's a framed photo of 3 generations of Callaway men in my uncle's office. My grandfather breaking ground on a building in Schaumburg. My uncle at the opening of a mixed-use development in Indianapolis. Derek at his first deal closing, pen in hand, grinning like someone had just handed him the future. I've seen it every Christmas for 6 years. I've never been in that office without feeling like a guest. My mother is Gerald's younger sister. She married a high school history teacher, my father, and they were happy in a quiet and particular way that the rest of the family found either charming or pitiable, depending on the year. My father passed away when I was 19. After that, my mother orbited the Callaway side more tightly, the way people sometimes move towards certainty when they've lost something they can't replace. She wanted them to approve of her. She wanted them to approve of me. It never quite worked, and over time I think she stopped distinguishing between their approval and her own. I had been dating Marcus for 14 months before Derek's rehearsal dinner. My mother knew his name and that he worked, in her words, with computers. She had not asked anything further. She had not asked where he was from, or what he'd studied, or what his last name was. When I tried to tell her more, she redirected the conversation the way you change a channel when something uncomfortable comes on. Not rude. Just efficient. Marcus Chen. 32 years old. He grew up in Evanston in a house his parents still live in. His mother teaches middle school. His father retired from the Postal Service 3 years ago. Marcus himself is, from the outside, unremarkable in the way that people who are deeply competent often appear unremarkable to those who haven't paid attention. He wears plain t-shirts and keeps a dog-eared copy of whatever he's reading in his back pocket. He makes his own coffee every morning with a small pour-over setup and takes it seriously enough to measure the water temperature. He drives a used Subaru and parks it crooked sometimes. At dinners, he is the person who refills your glass before you notice it's empty and remembers what you said 20 minutes ago when everyone else has moved on. He is also the co-founder and chief technology officer of a data security company called Meridian Shield that he built with 2 partners out of a shared apartment in Logan Square 7 years ago. They specialize in protecting the health data of nonprofit healthcare networks, the kind of organizations that can't afford a breach and can't afford enterprise-level security either. 3 years ago, Meridian Shield was acquired. The number was not public. Marcus stayed on to run the technical side and used the proceeds to fund a nonprofit arm that provides free cybersecurity infrastructure to community health clinics across the Midwest. Clinics like the one where I work, actually. We had received Buridian Shield services for 2 years before I ever met him at a mutual friend's birthday and had no idea. I didn't know the full shape of it for a long time. He mentioned the company once early on, briefly, the way you mention something that's finished. He said he'd done some tech work and was now mostly focused on the foundation side. I asked if he liked it. He said he liked that it was useful. That was the whole conversation. I didn't press because it didn't change anything that mattered to me. There were signs I noticed and noted and set aside. A call he took once where his voice shifted into something organized and careful, the way engineers sound when they're troubleshooting something with consequences. A letter on his kitchen counter from the Illinois Attorney General's office, dense with formal language, something about a data protection advisory panel. He saw me looking and said, "Old thing? Probably nothing." A line in an email I glimpsed accidentally, "Board approval required by end of fiscal quarter, recommend we move forward." I asked about it. He said, "Foundation stuff. Nothing interesting." I believed him not because I was naive, but because I'd already decided the work he did on the ground was enough for me. The rest was paperwork. Derek's rehearsal dinner was on a Friday in October. My cousin was marrying a woman named Priya, whose family had flown in from Houston and New Jersey. Her father, Dr. Anand Mehta, was a cardiologist who also served on the board of a major hospital network in Houston. He was the most distinguished guest at the dinner. My uncle had seated him at table 1, obviously directly beside himself and my Aunt Carol, where the floral centerpieces were full and white and the place cards were printed on cardstock with a small gold border. I found out about my seating 3 days before the dinner. I had called my mother to confirm the time, and she mentioned, as an aside, almost, that she'd told my aunt I probably wouldn't mind being toward the back since the front tables were for the immediate families and close business associates. She said it lightly, the way you say something you're hoping will land without friction. I was quiet for a moment. I said I understood. I don't think she heard what was underneath that. I told Marcus that evening. We were sitting in his kitchen and I was eating leftover pasta and I said it the same way she'd said it to me, lightly, like it was just logistics. He set down his fork. He looked at me for a moment. "Do you want to go?" he asked. I thought about it. I did want to go. He asked. I thought about it. I did want to go, not because I was expecting anything. Not because I thought there was a version of that evening that ended with my family seeing me differently. I wanted to go because I was tired of making myself smaller to avoid the disappointment of being made small by someone else. There's a difference, and I had only recently started to feel it. I want to see it clearly, I told him. "One more time, and then I know," he said. "Then I'm coming with you." We arrived 7 minutes early. Marcus wore a dark navy jacket and a white shirt, no tie. I wore a green dress I'd bought myself for my own last birthday because no one else had gotten me anything that year, and I decided that wasn't a reason not to have something nice. My Aunt Carol greeted us in the foyer with the particular warmth she reserves for people whose presence she's tolerating. She kissed my cheek. She looked at Marcus and said, "So lovely," and turned before he could respond. My Uncle Gerald shook his hand with the grip men use when they're assessing someone. "Good of you to come," he said to Marcus. "And what is it you do?" "Tech stuff," Marcus said. Gerald nodded in the way that closes a subject. My mother, standing slightly behind my aunt, gave me a small smile that contained an apology she would never say out loud. Table 9 was in the back left corner. There was no peony centerpiece. There was a small glass vase with a few stems of baby's breath that had started to droop. The place cards were the tentfold kind, typed. The couple seated across from us were pleasant and slightly confused about who I was in relation to the family. That was fine. I was slightly confused about that too. Dr. Mehta was seated at table 1 as expected, visibly at ease, the way people are when they're accustomed to being the most respected person in any room and have decided not to make it a burden on others. He spoke warmly and laughed easily. He had kind eyes. About 40 minutes into the dinner, he glanced toward our table. I noticed it in the way you notice someone's attention without knowing why. He looked at Marcus once, looked away, looked back. A small furrow appeared between his brows. Then he looked at his drink and seemed to be deciding something. My Uncle Gerald stood for his toast at 7:30. He is practiced at this. He commands attention in the way men do when they've spent decades being the most important person in their professional world. He spoke about Derek with real warmth, about the family name, about what it meant to build something that lasted, about Priya, whom he welcomed graciously. He was genuinely good at this part. Then his eyes found me in the back left corner and I saw the shift. It was small, a half-second recalibration before his expression settled into something indulgent. My niece Claire is here with us tonight, he said. Claire does social work over on the west side. Very meaningful, very hands-on, helping people navigate the system. A brief pause, just long enough. It takes a special kind of person to choose that path. He smiled toward me. We're glad you could make it, sweetheart. 52 people looked at me. I kept my face still. I put a piece of bread in my mouth and chewed it slowly. Marcus placed his napkin on the table. He did it carefully, the way people do when they've made a decision and are executing it calmly. Then he stood up. The room noticed. The way a room notices a sound that breaks a pattern. Across the dining room, Dr. Mehta had already risen. He was moving, not quickly, but with the directional certainty of someone who knows where they're going and why. He walked from table 1 to table 9 and the room watched every step. He stopped at our table. He looked at Marcus with an expression I recognized from moments in my work when someone has just understood something they hadn't expected. Marcus, he said. His voice was measured, quiet, but the room had gone quiet enough that it carried. I thought that was you from across the room. I wasn't certain. Marcus said hello with the ease of someone who'd been recognized before and didn't particularly need the recognition. Dr. Mehta looked at me, then at my uncle, who had remained standing at the head table with his glass still in his hand. He addressed the room in the way physicians sometimes do, not performing, just stating, I want to make sure people at this dinner know who they're sharing a table with, he said. This is Marcus Chen. He founded Meridian Shield 7 years ago. They built the data security infrastructure that now protects patient records at over 90 community health clinics across Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. He paused. For free. Through his foundation, because he decided that the organizations doing the most critical health work in underserved communities should have the same protection as systems that can afford to pay for it. He looked at Marcus. I've been trying for 2 years to get you to speak at the Hospital Network's annual board conference. He said it with a warmth that was also slightly exasperated. He turned back toward the room. He also, I'm told, has a partner who runs crisis intervention at one of the clinics his foundation supports on the west side. He glanced at me, and something in his expression told me he'd already known more than he'd let on. I imagine her work is the reason he got interested in that side of things to begin with. My uncle's mouth was open. Nothing was coming out. I looked at my mother. She was looking at the tablecloth. Marcus spoke without raising his voice. I didn't come tonight to make a point about who I am, he said. I came because Claire asked me, and because she's the most clear-eyed, steady person I know. He looked at my Uncle Gerald directly. She works 60-hour weeks in a system that is genuinely broken, and she does it because she believes people deserve help even when it's inconvenient and even when no one's watching. He paused. You had 14 months. You never asked my last name or what I did. You categorized me in the first 30 seconds and moved on. That's a choice. And it's also a pretty accurate summary of how you've treated her for a long time. He sat back down. My legs were not fully steady when I stood up. My voice was. I looked at my uncle, then at my aunt, then at my mother. I said, you've been doing this since I chose my career, not always in front of people, usually in smaller ways. The way you say my job is meaningful with that specific pause before meaningful. The way you've introduced me at every family event for 6 years as doing the social work thing, like it's a phase I haven't finished. The way you put us at a table in the back and didn't bother with a real centerpiece because we weren't part of the introduction sequence that mattered to you." My Aunt Carol opened her mouth. I kept going. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm done being the person who makes herself easier to ignore so that you're comfortable." I looked at my mother for a moment. "And I'm done watching you apologize for me to people who should be apologizing to you." I picked up my bag. Marcus was already standing. We walked out through the dining room. The room did not make a sound. The call from my cousin Derek came 5 days later. His voice was quiet and careful in the way voices are when the person has been sitting with something they didn't know how to start. He said he'd spoken to his father. He said his father had called it a misunderstanding. I didn't respond to that. Derek let the silence sit for a moment and then he said, "I don't actually think it was a misunderstanding. I think I saw what it was and I let it happen because it was easier than saying something." I told him I appreciated him saying that. He asked if he could take us to dinner sometime, just the three of us. He and Priya and Marcus and me. I said I'd think about it. Dr. Chambase Mehta had apparently said something to my uncle directly, privately, before leaving that night. I don't know exactly what was said. What I know is that my uncle called my mother the next morning and was on the phone with her for 40 minutes, which was longer than he had spoken to her in recent memory. 2 days later, Gerald sent me a text message. It said, "I owe you a real conversation." I haven't replied yet, not because I don't intend to, because I am thinking about what I actually want from that conversation before I walk into it. My mother called 4 days after the dinner. She called from her car, I could tell. The way the sound is slightly hollow. She said, "Can we have lunch?" I said, "Yes." We met at a diner we used to go to when I was in high school, back when things between us were simpler, or maybe just less defined. She ordered coffee and held the mug with both hands and looked out the window for a while before she said anything. She said, "I know I've done this too. Not just Gerald. I've let it happen, and sometimes I've done it myself, and I think I told myself it was just family. And it was just jokes, but it wasn't, and I knew that, and I did it anyway." She stopped. "I don't know when I stopped fighting for you in those rooms. I think I was tired and I thought you were strong enough to handle it and I used your strength as a reason not to do something I should have done." That honesty cost her. I could hear it. I told her what I needed. I said I needed her to stop explaining me to them and start seeing me for herself. I said I needed her to ask me real questions about my work, not out of politeness, but because she actually wanted to know. I said I needed 6 months of us building something before I could trust that she meant it. She agreed. She didn't negotiate the terms. She wrote them down on the paper edge of her placemat, which was the most my mother thing she'd ever done. And something about that made it feel real. The months that followed were not simple. There were conversations that went well and conversations that stalled, and one dinner where my Uncle Gerald tried to make a joke that landed wrong and we had to stop and address it directly in a way that was uncomfortable for everyone. Progress in families is not linear. Some weeks it felt like we were building something. Some weeks it felt like we were just sitting in the room together, not making it worse, which I have come to believe is also a form of progress. I've thought a lot about Marcus and about what it means that I didn't know the full scope of what he'd built for so long. He never needed me to know. He wasn't waiting for the reveal to feel like himself. He just did the work because the work was worth doing, and the rest of it, the acquisition, the foundation, the recognition from people like Dr. Mehta, was incidental to why he got up in the morning. I've spent a long time trying to make my work legible to people who had already written the caption before they looked at the photo. I drove home from a difficult conversation with my mother one evening and sat in the parking lot of my apartment building for a few minutes before going inside. I wasn't crying. I wasn't relieved exactly. There was just a quality of quiet in my chest that was different from the usual quiet, the kind that feels like a held breath. This felt like exhaling. Marcus was making dinner when I came in. He looked up and I sat down at the kitchen counter and said, "I think something is actually changing." He handed me a glass of water and said, "Good." That was enough. Priya told me last month that she and Derek are going forward with the wedding in the spring. She called me herself. Not through Derek, which I noticed. She said she hoped I would be there. I told her I wanted to be. I meant it. She also said, quietly, at the end of the call, that she had seen what happened at the rehearsal dinner, and that she was sorry it had taken that to make people look at what had been happening all along. I told her it wasn't her fault. She said she knew that, but she'd wanted to say it anyway. There's something I have been thinking about since that night. Dr. Mehta walked across that dining room, not to make a point, and not to perform anything. He walked across because he recognized someone whose work had mattered, and he thought that recognition was worth making visible. He didn't do it to embarrass my uncle. He did it because he thought the truth of who was in that room should be accurate. I think about my clients when I think about that. The ones who come in after years of being categorized by one bad chapter, one diagnosis, one decision that became their whole file. Part of my job is to say, out loud, in a room, this person is more than the label on their folder. This person has done things of value. This person is worth the effort of actually looking at. I have been doing that for others for 6 years. I am learning, slowly, to let other people do it for me. So let me ask you something before you go. Is there someone in your life you have placed in a smaller category than they deserve? Someone whose work you summarized in a single word because it was convenient and you were busy, and you assumed you already understood the value? Think about that. Really think about it. Because the person at table 9 might be someone you don't actually know yet.